Morning. My name is Orlando Rivera, and I am looking into introducing a novel loading methodology to reduce overtraining and injury in powerlifters. So, to get started, what is powerlifting? Powerlifting is an actual sport contested of three separate events. These events are the barbell back squat, bench press, and deadlift. It's a sport widely contested around the world. The governing body for the drug tested federations is the IPF, the International Powerlifting Federation. Just a little background, the first official event was contested in 1965, put on by the AAU. So, with regards to powerlifting, it is a sport that does involve lifting maximal loads. So what we've seen is that overtraining sometimes happens, and the question is, well, what is overtraining? So overtraining is where there's a sport-specific decrease in performance put together with decreases or disturbances in overall mood states. So how do we typically assess this? Usually through like a POMS, profile of mood scale. And true overtraining lasts for an extended period of time. So there's something else, another clinical definition would be overreaching. Overreaching is the short-term form of overtraining. Overtraining may persist upwards of months. So 1, 2, 3 months down the road, even if we've decreased training volume, sometimes athletes might have a decrease in overall performance. So in general, we try to avoid reaching this overtraining state. With regards to injury rates in strength sports, weightlifters tend to achieve, there's about 2.4 to 4 injuries for every 1,000 hours of training. Powerlifters seems to be a little bit more variable. We have about 1 to 4.4 injuries for every 1,000 hours of training. And then at the extreme end of strength sports is the strongman competitions, and their injury rates are a little bit higher. This could be because there's a greater variability in the events they have to perform. They could perform events that require maximal strength, endurance, sprinting, so it varies a little bit with strongman athletes. So injury-specific prevalence, I think this is particularly important. First is that Winwood in 2014 found that in a survey research, he found 82% of powerlifters were injured within the past 12 months of their training, right? So this is fairly important. If an injury is described as something that forces you to modify or reduce training for a week or longer, this can set you back from your goals. More importantly, or equally important, I should say, is the sites where athletes tend to be injured. So the lower back, the shoulder are the most common. Stromback in 2008 seems to be in agreement with Winwood in that he found that 87% of powerlifters were also injured within the last 12 months. And he also found that the low back and the shoulder were equally as common in terms of injury site. So a few things I wanted to highlight were injuries were more likely to happen in training versus competition. This is particularly relevant for this project because we're talking about modifying training load, not competition load or anything along those lines. And then lastly, 23% of powerlifters found that their injuries happen because of excessive volume or load. And if we can learn to modify load, we may be able to reduce injury rates in powerlifters. So the current gold standard is percentage-based training. So typically the way percentage-based training works is you have to do a 1 repetition maximum, and after your 1 repetition maximum is found for each respective lift, the back squat, the bench press, and the deadlift, subsequent training is based on your 1 repetition maximum. The literature largely supports this methodology, so it is the gold standard. However, that does not mean it is the be-all, end-all for training at this point in time, because there are some inherent concerns with this methodology. While I'm not as focused on the the problems with testing, in that testing is time consuming and there's a greater chance of injury, I'm looking more so at the methodology for loading and training. So the biggest problem with percentage-based training is that it might not actually be accurate. So our goal is to inform the powerlifters that they might be training at an inaccurate load. And because they might be training in an inaccurate load, this may subsequently lead to overtraining and injury. Why they might be training at an inaccurate load is beyond the scope of this presentation, so I can probably just jump to the next slide. So who are the key stakeholders? The key stakeholders when you're trying to introduce change to some type of training methodology are the athlete and the coach. The athlete, obviously, because he's the one that has to perceive the benefit. He has to understand that, okay, switching from a percentage-based methodology to a velocity-based methodology, which is what I'm looking at for my project, may offer some type of benefit. And the coach has to agree, because the coach is the one who prescribes all the training, so they have to be on board. So some secondary stakeholders might be other resistance trained persons. So what happens is, with my project, I'm hoping that I can loosely generalize some of the findings to other resistance trained persons, in that velocity-based loading might also be able to reduce injury rates in other resistance trained persons, and that future research should go on more towards the general public. Some other beneficiaries that have specific stakes in this type of research are the linear encoding companies. So I just listed a few. These companies obviously want to see the success of their products. So they want to make sure their products are as reliable as possible, that they're a valid proxy of maximal strength, which the research has largely supported at this point. And then lastly, the governing bodies. Their sport, powerlifting probably has a dogma around it where it might seem dangerous. If we could produce some literature out there that shows that, well, powerlifting isn't dangerous, and it's no more dangerous than any other sports like football or basketball or soccer, right? Powerlifting might be able to get behind some of this and support it. So we're talking about change at the individual level, okay? So what are some barriers to change? Well, first we have to really look at the behaviors of powerlifters. And there's some research from ASA in 2018 which looked at strength athletes and their pain tolerance. And he found that strength athletes had a lower sensitivity to pain than non-strength athletes. So what he wrote is that strength athletes seem to be accustomed to experiencing pain. This can be good, this can be bad. Powerlifters specifically may develop what he called a pain hyposensitivity through training. So through training, we just get desensitized to what pain is. And because of that, I think it's possible that that fine line of both overtraining and injury might be towed a little too carefully when actually in training. The next thing, and conversely, if we're looking at people that are often injured, and this could be powerlifters, they seem to avoid pain. So if our research can find that velocity-based methodologies reduce overall injury rates, this can help people, both of those populations. In agreement, Sarah Gatto in 2014, he found, this was actually some interviews with some medical professionals, and I think it was 30 medical professionals. One of the most common findings was they believed that athletes believed they needed to sustain pain to progress. right? So they thought they needed to experience pain to get better. All right, so these are the beliefs of the practitioner's beliefs of the athlete's beliefs. When looking at intention, so I think, what is the athlete's intention to change? And what we need to do is change the perception around the current gold standard. And we need to inform both athletes and coaches on the reasons why this current methodology may not be appropriate. And it's already changing, right? So it's already happening. In 2019, Shaw surveyed some powerlifters, and he found that 49.6% of powerlifters were using RPE, while 47% of powerlifters were using repetitions and reserve. Both of these methodologies are a different form of loading methodology than the current gold standard. So we've already started to shift. We've already started that shift. I just think shifting it now towards velocity-based training may be kind of the new frontier, so to speak, and we need to inform powerlifters of this new technology that is now readily available for them. So when making the change, what is something that's going to possibly hold them back from change? And I think this comes really back to like social cognitive theory, where we're looking at like self-efficacy, right? And the environment and reciprocal determinism. So for instance, are powerlifters going to believe in their ability to operate this technology, right? Using a linear encoder, developing their own individualized profile. And I think through training, it should not be that difficult. It's not much more difficult than what they're already using for percentage-based training. I think the bigger barrier here, at least with regards to social cognitive theory, is their environment, right? So when they're in the gym, how do they feel when they are setting up their velocity-based device? So they have this unit, they have to hook it up to a barbell, their iPad. Are they going to feel kind of embarrassed or out of place when they're hooking this stuff in the middle of a commercial gym? That's something that we have to explore. Access to equipment can be a barrier for some of them, for some of the powerlifters, where as of right now, the price point for linear encoders has dropped significantly. In the 90s and early 2000s, we were looking at somewhere around $1,500 for a linear encoder, and the only person that could really afford it were like major colleges. So at this point, linear encoders prices have come down to anywhere from like $300 upwards of about $450, $500, which is much more feasible for your average powerlifter to afford. Access, they also need an iPad and iPhone. That should not be an issue. And the gym, it shouldn't be an issue already because they're already training. Some other issues that might arise are that velocity-based training tends to be slightly more time-consuming. You have to set up the equipment. It takes a few minutes to set up, takes a few minutes to break down. But other than that, it's something that I think they'll just have to adjust to. So reinforcing. So throughout the process, and I'm speaking as a coach to an athlete. As a coach to an athlete, we have to remind them of what this new methodology can do for them, right? So excessive training, both volume and load, can lead to injury. We know that. Powerlifters are intelligent people. They know that. We just have to remind them that this new methodology can help monitor and limit excessive training, which should keep them healthy. Another thing to remind athletes is that they do not need to go to failure. There's research in 2006 from Izquierdo, which found that you don't have to go to failure to improve strength, hypertrophy, or power, right? And consistently reminding powerlifters, because I think that's something that kind of goes hand in hand with the powerlifter persona of they need to experience pain. They do need to eke out their last repetition. We have to constantly remind them that you don't have to, and the research supports this. As far as positive reinforcement goes, reinforce that, hey, these programs work. a velocity-based training program. It's already been done by Orange in 2019, and it supported that they improved maximal strength more so than a periodized program. They're following a periodized program, right? Periodized training works. And then finally, trying something new, a novel technology can at times be fun, and they might find some enjoyment in this. And then the last thing is social support. Once again, from a social cognitive theory standpoint, support from the coach and from their peers in training is incredibly important. If you send somebody out there into a commercial gym with velocity-based linear encoder, they might feel awkward, they might feel embarrassed, but you have to consistently support them in saying, hey, this is working. Or if they start to doubt themselves, there has to be, hey, this works, the literature supports it. You have to just follow through on the process. Support from peers in training, same exact thing. If they tend to train in a group of 4 or 5 people and they're the only one using this methodology, they might start to doubt themselves. Hey, why am I doing this? What's the benefits of this? So on and so forth. And we have to, as a coach, start to speak to their peers to make sure they support this as well. And then lastly, family and friends can probably help as well. So I think to actually make a change, I thought the theory that was most appropriate was the trans-theoretical model of change. If we're working as a coach with an individual, how are we going to get them to switch over to this new methodology if they've been using an older methodology for years and years and it's worked up to this point? Well, the stages are pre-contemplation. So you have to just put the information out there. An individual or a client might not be aware that there's a problem. So you have to start putting information saying, like, first it might be, hey, you've been injured several times over the past few years if they have, or maybe you have to speak to how maybe they've plateaued in training because of overtraining, whatever it is. You as a coach have to put it out there, put all this new information out there. From there, I think contemplation and pre-contemplation kind of go hand in hand, where during the contemplation stage, where an individual is really thinking of making a change within the next 6 months, you have to start to aim your information. All right, so be more specific, speak to more specific injuries, or maybe provide more specific examples of others who have used this technology before, and it seems to have worked for them. As they get closer towards the preparation stage, you have to really kind of lay everything out for them, right? So as a coach, we can show them, hey, here's your training plan. This is what it would look like. This is what you would do week 1, week 2. Powerlifters love to see a plan. And if you put it out there for them, they're more likely to jump on board in, let's say, within the next week versus in the next 4 weeks. And then finally, action dictates that a change has been made and they've jumped on board. Once they get into that action phase, those principles that we just spoke about on the prior slide with reinforcement, positive reminders, and social support really come into play for them to maintain this change. And then lastly, termination is where they finally become almost self-sufficient to a sense, where the change has worked, they've fully adopted the methodology, and they no longer need the coach or the peers or even themselves to kind of remind them that, hey, this is working, and they don't even think about reverting back to their prior methodologies or prior training tools. So I think the trans-theoretical model of change is particularly relevant when trying to induce change in a training methodology. And these are my references, and that's it.